Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Tax Hour. Today I'm pleased to be joined by Bill Dodwell, who was the former head of tax policy at Deloitte, tax director at the OTS for 4 years, non-exec director currently for HMRC, and a very long career in something that I found myself to become more and more interested in. Certainly since doing the podcast, but probably over the years, when you start out doing tax, you just want to learn how does tax work? What do I need to know to tell clients? The more experience you get, the more interested I think you become in tax policy and things like that. So I was very pleased when Bill agreed to come and talk to me about tax simplification, because that I think I've become more and more passionate about. So firstly, thanks for joining me, Bill.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Let's just kick off with a couple of warm-up questions. So you'd already spent many years working in tax policy at Deloitte. So what sort of prompted you to move towards tax director at the OTS? Why was simplification specifically worth spending your time? Do you think?
Well, the first thing, as people sort of know, you have a finite career at one of the larger firms. Yeah. And so mine came to an end from all of that. So I was looking around what to do. And I wanted to stay in tax. I love the stuff. I'm still loving it too. And so I think I officially retired at the end of May 2018. And in April, the Office of Tax Simplification was advertising for policy advisors, team members, to join the team. And so I thought, that'd be quite interesting. I'll apply for that. And so I applied and was appointed a team member. And then a couple of months later, the then tax director, Paul Morton, announced he was going to depart. And so I then applied for the tax director role and had a competition and went through and was appointed for that. So excellent. I learned a lot from tax simplification, and I learned a lot about tax policy. One of the things, I had 13 years as head of tax policy at Deloitte, so I thought I knew a fair bit about policy. But it turned out that I've learned an awful lot more since. Both at the Office of Tax Simplification, which is a mixture of people from the private sector and from HMRC. And then as a non-executive at HMRC, I learned more about some of the challenges internally. And now's probably a good time just to make it clear. We're talking about my OTS time. And before that, I'm not speaking for HMRC, of course.
Absolutely, So in terms of tax simplification, what do you think kind of the main reasons that we do have, and we'll come on to the complexity of the system, but why do you think the level of complexity we have is at its current level? What's kind of been the drivers behind that?
I think we've got an awful lot of reasons for that. Certainly, the first one I'd start with is that business has become more complicated. Over my career, we've had much more complicated accounting standards. We've had new tax things brought in for loan relationships, foreign exchange, contracts, financial difference contracts, all that sort of thing. And all of that has made our business life more complicated, alongside globalisation, of course. No longer need to ask the Treasury, could you set up overseas? All that has gone. And so all of that complexity, I think, is the place to start from all of that. Another part of it is that when you've got quite a complicated economy like the UK, it's a large economy, lots of global transactions, a wide range of incomes of people, you're inevitably going to have things that you've got to deal with. And you'll have areas that, the governments of the day are going to set as something that matters to them, that they think will boost whatever it is they want to boost. So I think, for me, the place to start with simplification is it shouldn't be a sort of goal in itself. It's a means to help land, if you like, the policies of the government of the day in the best possible way. The way it's easiest for taxpayers and, where appropriate, their agents to comply, the easiest for HMRC to administer. That's where simplification really comes in.
I mean, what I was going to bring up is, and I'm sure I've said this on this podcast before, the LinkedIn post that Andrew Hubbard put on, I can't remember when it was, sometime last year, of the the length of the I think what was Butterworth and now the Tolly Yellow books, I think has gone from something like 62, 63 tax years, 600 odd pages. Now it's 16,000 or something like that, and it's not quite as substantial, but quite similar with the Orange books as well. And actually, that time period we're talking about, since since those very short tax legislation, as we know it, we've had so much has happened since then. The internet, the globalisation, everything you've just mentioned. All of that has happened. So, in the technology age, things have moved on so much quicker than perhaps, even in the past 300-400 years before that date.
Quite possible. We didn't have income tax 300 or 400 years ago, did we, of course? But the other thing we've had was the tax law rewrite, which was a substantial effort to modernise the language of the legislation. And what it did was have a much more structured approach to things. So you'd have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which you used not to have in some of the old compressed stuff. But it massively lengthened the law as well. So you've got that is yet another reason why we've got lengthier legislation. And the final thing is that obviously you've had cases of avoidance. And I think we're living in an era of much less tax avoidance than there used to be. Things that, people just do to save tax rather than because they've got a commercial aspect or whatever. We got much less than we used to have, but it's been with us a long time, and obviously governments need to react to that and bring in legislation to do it.
And the obvious one I'm thinking about, obviously, I spoke to Ray McCann a few weeks ago, and Part 7A, the disguised remuneration, that's, things like that. But you've actually made a good point, because with the sort of the rewrite, the new legislation compared to some of the, sort of the very old Finance Acts. So for someone like me who, I think I did my tax exams in 2014, something like that, and
I won't tell you when I didn't.
But the point is that the legislation I learnt was a lot easier to read than most of the things like Finance Act 1930, which I still draw on from stamp duty and things like that. So, I think that's interesting, because obviously I haven't experienced before the rewrite in quite that same way that I think a lot of listeners will have done. So that's something for. But
I think the legislation for me isn't something we should expect regular people to read.
No.
Just as you and I don't read about motoring law, we have the highway code or whatever it is. It's fairly straightforward to see all of that. We shouldn't expect people to read tax law. We should expect them to read guidance. And we should expect the design of the system to help them down certain paths. So for me, that's, and anyone who talks about the length of the legislation, lots of people do.
They're kind of missing the point.
I think they're missing the point that it's not needed for regular people.
Yeah, I guess that when you just say, oh, here's what the legislation looks like, the books are, it's like the size of a bookshelf now, you kind of think, actually, even for tax advisors, you're only going to know a fraction of that. But I also think that's where sort of the industry is going as advisors, that you draw on different specialists.
Yes, you absolutely do.
You don't, you've got general practitioners, and there are general practitioners who are very, very good at knowing a lot about many different subjects. But even those very good general practitioners will still come to specialists when feel they're out of their depth. And I think
and you could, I think today you can see general practice as a specialism in its own right. Because that most people in the large firms where I've spent most of my career, we did end up specialising. And it's fair enough. I did start by doing income tax and corporation tax and even a bit of VAT. But the first one to go was VAT.
I don't blame you.
And then the second one was income tax, and so I ended up with corporation tax. And that's what happens if you join one of the larger firms these days.
Right. 'Cause, I mean, I had a very different route. I've never worked at a Big Four. I worked at a firm with maybe 40 people in, and general practice, audit, accounts. What you'd expect. I did accounts, enjoyed tax whilst I was studying, so then went to move to personal tax, did a bit of corporation tax, so I was doing bits of everything. Then I moved so that I could become a bit more of a corporate specialist.
Yeah.
And then obviously Jones Miller, and I've done specialised even more, not just corporate now, more restructures and share schemes and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the sort of thing you'll find a whole bunch of people come and consult you with, because restructuring isn't common.
No.
And so having a specialist who's done lots of them is really, really important.
Exactly.
Today. And you'll find that even within the large firms, that not everyone in corporate tax is an expert in restructuring. Not everyone is an expert in treasury management, let's just say. So that, or transfer pricing.
Yeah.
And so you've got specialisms within specialism to start with.
And I kind of feel like a part of being a good tax advisor is knowing who to speak to, and having that network of people who, we're lucky with the summer. I won't talk too much about the summer group, but because we've joined various hubs around the country. Yeah. I had a report a couple of weeks ago which was restructuring, which is why they came to me, but had some very technical VAT stuff in there, had some international stuff. I didn't have a clue about those things. Yeah. But we've got someone, in London to do the VAT, and we've got someone somewhere else to do the international. And being able to draw from that within your own firm is great. But, the firm that I said I started out with, they wouldn't have that, but knowing who they could go to achieve
and
that is
to
important.
one level, knowing how to spot something is actually a skill in itself. And so you end up trying to train people to spot angles of VAT, so at least they can go and consult about it.
It's almost the awareness level aspects for most people, I think. And I think I said last week, the best accountants are the ones who know what they don't know. So that you can say, look, there is an issue here. I don't know what the actual answer is, but go and speak to X, Y, Z. And so I guess kind of I don't know whether it's that the tax industry's gone that way because of the legislation, or whether the legislation.
I think it's gone that way because of the complexity of business and the way in which, yes, it's supported by the tax legislation, which is also, but I'd start with the complexity of business and the fact that it's, involves so much more than it ever used to. Yeah.
So before we actually started recording, you said about the OTS has actually kind of done some work into actually defining simplification. So do you want to talk a little bit about
of course,
the work it did, the conclusions it reached? And
I thought it was a bit strange when the Treasury said to us, can you do a report on what simplification means? But it was actually very good because it forced us to think about it. And I think the way to see simplification is not an end in itself. And perhaps that was the mistake of calling something the Office of Tax Simplification, because what you're really thinking is what's the government policy that we're trying to get to here? And obviously government policy in taxation is either just raising money, or it's encouraging or discouraging particular activities, or it's redistribution. Those are the sort of three main areas that taxation gets involved with. And simplification is all about doing it in the best possible way. So that if you do want to redistribute money, something like that, you do it in a manner that is easiest for everyone to comply with. I also think it needs to be done in the manner that people can understand it, because the tax system often presents us with a choice of different routes and that sort of thing. And you need to have some feeling as to, what's the best choice for me in my circumstances. The most common one with someone starting up in business is that just me, which we confusingly call a sole trader, or should I set up a company to do that? And the issues are so different. And we all know that regular people have no idea about this strange legal construct called a company. And that's a problem, trying to explain to them it's different from you, the owner, and the person who does all the work. Transactions between you and the company are different. And trying to help people understand that is really quite challenging. I think we've probably all had experience.
As well.
So that's where I'd start with simplification. It's the best way of trying to do something. And sometimes the government's objectives aren't simple. So let's take the high income child benefit charge. Take something slightly controversial, if you like. Now, I think what people forget is the background to this was that prior to the 2010 general election, when the coalition government was elected, there was a big campaign that people earning over £50,000 shouldn't be receiving benefits from the system. And that was picked up by George Osborne as Chancellor, and he made the decision that he was going to remove child benefit from people earning over £50,000 a year. Obviously, £50,000 in 2010 is quite different to 50,000 in 2026, but we get the point there. And I think it's important to remember that background, because lots of people criticise the charge, and that's fair enough. But that's why the Chancellor of the day, George Osborne, chose to do it. And his tax minister at the time, David Gauke, has acknowledged that the government was aware of the complexity of what they were doing. But they thought it could be delivered by HMRC. And the simplification angle is really, could HMRC have done more to help people understand it, help people pay it, report it, and all that sort of thing? And I think if we look back, the answer is undoubtedly HMRC could and should have done more at the time. And it's now doing more now. But, we're quite a long way from when that was first introduced.
Just trying to remember, because it's difficult when you work in tax to think, well, I knew about it.
Yes.
But, and now, I have the high income charge, and the biggest issue for me was actually they changed my tax code 4 times last year, because I kept having to go back and go, no, that's wrong. So I kind of think, I think now that there is a lot more knowledge about it than there was.
Everything seeps into public consciousness. And most importantly, the newspapers write about it. Because we all talk about the reduction of, what goes on at the newspapers, and indeed, TV and radio too. But they remain really important for helping people learn about stuff. So, the money program on Radio 4 is a really important knowledge source for people. It helps introduce people to things, just as the financial pages in all the newspapers are actually helpful. And again, I guess I probably think about it from a different perspective because of being in one specific specialism, and you do think even accountants and tax advisors struggle with this. Yes.
But if you take kind of the perspective you've sort of opened up, is really what we're probably 95% of the population is complexity is around, they pay income tax and maybe high income child benefit charge, and perhaps not a huge amount more. And so, it's kind of, it is a very different perspective. The one thing I was also going to draw on from what you said is about people actually knowing that certain taxes even exist, because what I have found is, so someone will have done a transaction and then not even realise there's a certain tax issue at stake. And as you say, it's raising the awareness among everybody about that, really.
I think you've hit a really important point there. We are not born with a sort of tax chip embedded that just sort of kicks in and tells us what's going on. And so, you do look to third parties to help inform you what's going on. So, if you think of another example, I can't remember exactly when this was, but the government decided that if you sold a property and had to pay capital gains tax on it, then you needed to report it initially within 30 days and pay the tax. And if necessary, you could reclaim, if you'd overpaid, you could reclaim that or whatever later on. Now, what we didn't do at the time is strongly encourage, legislate for conveyancers and others to pass on the information, so at least people could go and read up about that.
Yeah.
Not give tax advice. If you're a conveyancer, there's no reason why you should be asked to do something that's outside your skill base. But you can be asked to pass on the information. And I'm sure the best ones did, but I'm equally sure that the vast majority didn't pass on anything. And so you ended up with a lot of people who had no idea about this charge and only found out it later when they eventually reported it on their tax return and told, well, you should have done this a year ago.
I think I did come across both. I had people coming to me saying my conveyancing solicitor has told me to come and talk to you.
Yeah.
And then I had others who the conveyancing solicitor didn't even know themselves.
Yes.
Which is kind of a concern in itself, I think.
It sort of is, but on the other hand, conveyancing is a pretty low price activity, and the people who specialise in it are there to deal with land law.
Yeah.
They're not there to, yes, there's a bit of stamp duty, but they don't know anything other than the most basic stuff. And they certainly don't know the capital gains.
Yeah. I mean, it does start to blur the lines a little bit, doesn't it? Because the conveyances are the ones who handle the stamp duty.
Yes.
You've then got the capital gains part. So I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't know the industry at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if more conveyancers have kind of done a joint venture or something with a tax specialist, who had to have kind of that in-house as well and things like that. But again, it's about the knowing.
Yes.
Even for people in the industry that work there, probably those conveyancers, once they found out and once they probably had an unhappy client go, oh, you didn't tell me about this.
Yeah.
Since then, they probably have done it.
Possibly. But of course, we have to bear in mind most transactions are sales of a main residence.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that is tax-free. Yeah. So, the majority of residential transactions are not going to be taxable in the first place. Right. So. Yeah. And the other thing, you do pay so little money for it.
Yeah.
And we're both from, you're currently a professional background. I have been, and there's a cost of doing everything.
Absolutely.
And you need to find a means of recovering that from somewhere. People aren't able to learn something and then advise on it without having a sort of economic benefit from it, if you like, or encouragement.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone's in business to make money at the end of the day, aren't they?
Yeah, so. and you have to support your investments as well as what you pay your staff and all that sort of thing, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about the OTS a little bit more, what do you think were the sort of key findings and the most important sort of things that they managed to achieve during their...
Well, I think what the Office of Tax Simplification could do, and it was based on the fact that it was a combination of private sector people such as me and a range of others, people from HMRC and occasionally somebody from the Treasury.
Right.
And that combination meant that you weren't just getting one side of a problem. You had a group of people who were working together. And sharing the different experiences they would have had of something.
Yeah.
And I think that was, a big advantage of the OTS. The other big advantage it had was that, it was a government body, if you like. It was an arm's length body of the Treasury, technically. And that meant it had an office in the Treasury HMRC building. And it had access to HMRC's CHI division, knowledge, analysis and intelligence, the economics and statistics part of HMRC. Right. So you could ask, so how many people do this and what's the cost of that, if you like. And that would and all of that was then published in the reports. Yeah. And that would help inform the debate as a minimum, as well as, in some cases provide the impetus for recommended change. So it was, if you take the first inheritance tax report, we did two. The first one I wasn't involved with. It was all about administration. Yeah. And we basically demonstrated that, over 500,000 people, estates had to fill in an inheritance tax return, but only at the time, 25,000 were actually paying anything.
Right.
And we hadn't really got, you
Yeah.
can understand why you have to have more filing, because HMRC doesn't have asset information.
Yeah.
And inheritance tax is, of course, based on assets, not on income,
Yeah.
of course. So you would need more than just the base number of estates, but you certainly didn't need 20 times as many.
Yeah,
and because, thanks to that report, the government made some changes and reduced the number of people who needed to file an inheritance tax return. And for me, that was a sort of big win. It was a genuine simplification for many, many estates, which was really helpful. Okay. But the other thing that, the big thing the office could do was study something in depth. And whether that is the study that John Whiting led, looking at income tax and national insurance, and what are the differences, and could you even out those differences, for example. That was 2 pieces of work, big effort, lots of detailed work. And it's really quite hard to see who is doing that in the UK tax system. And if you haven't got a body such as the OTS to go and do that. The ones I did, we looked at the structure of inheritance tax. We did 2 reports on capital gains tax. Right. We looked at how to make much better use of third-party data, for example. Okay. And all of that was, it would take us 6 months to do. We would get a lot of data in from HMRC. We'd talk to the specialists there. We talked to as wide a range of outsiders as you possibly could, including traveling the country and so on, because not everyone's based in London, as you know.
Indeed.
But it's very important. You can have a London bias. And, as the Office of Tax Simplification, we absolutely didn't want that. That was anathema to us. So we had to, we were happy to go and travel and go and speak to people in all sorts of different parts of the world.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realise that. So
that matters. And I think with the abolition of the OTS, that's something that the government, HMRC and the Treasury have lost, is that ability to reach a wide range of inputs, if you like. Yeah. Yes, of course they put stuff out for consultation, but it's not quite the same.
No, I don't think. I mean, I was on one of the ICAW's. They're doing the entrepreneurs consultation at the moment. And to be fair, you do, because the ICAW committees are made up of sort of big 4 advisors and people like me who are in smaller firms or more regional firms and things like that. So you do get a range, but you are still only getting a range from advisors. Yes. And a lot of people, they might have an advisor for sort of their annual tax returns, but they don't necessarily have a tax advisor that they go to all the time. They're going to just their accountant who maybe doesn't have a voice on those types of committees.
Yes. It's really, really hard to reach an actual taxpayer. We did occasionally. So but traveling around the country does mean that you end up with better proxies for that, because I remember going to Cardiff, for example, to have a meeting with the CIT ATT branch in Cardiff. Yeah. And, we were really interested in life events at the time. In particular, people starting up in business. Yeah. And, the problem that everyone in the room said is that for many cases, they only got to meet somebody 18 months in. By the time they'd had a red notice from either Companies House or a sort of a request, you're filing late, and here's some penalties from HMRC. So, they were trying to deal with a problem, if you like, rather than talk to people at the start and end up with the sort of best sort of structure. Yeah,
I think I experienced that as well. People don't normally come to me until they are quite well established, and say, well, actually, the best tax advice for you now, maybe you want an asset protection structure, so you need a share exchange, and we're going to charge you XYZ to do that. Yeah. Well, actually, you could have set this up from the start and paid no advice fees at all, because it was just
Well, you would have paid advice
maybe
fees,
a small amount, but significantly less. Yes. But the difficulty is people starting out don't normally have those funds to have specialist advice either.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't know what they don't know. Yeah, exactly. We've talked about how do you help people understand that there is something important here. So I've always thought that tax education was a really important thing.
Yeah.
And that means trying to teach tax in schools, where the HMRC have a very good tax facts program.
Right.
And, there's a range of schools that do manage to get some tax taught at that stage.
And I've seen people on LinkedIn, not necessarily tax specifically, but people who are kind of lobbying for more finance education,
Yes.
which presumably isn't just tax, but
no,
hopefully
it's all about things like what is a mortgage and what's interest and what's the compounding effect. So there's a whole lot of stuff to teach there as well. And the problem is there's pressure in the curriculum. And the second problem is that teachers often don't have training to do that. Yeah. They're specialists in English or one of the science subjects or something like that.
Absolutely.
And understanding either the economics of taxation or indeed the practical aspects, isn't something that most people have been trained for. So you need a specialist to help with that.
I also think that when you're at school and you're not a taxpayer yet, you're not necessarily that interested compared
Quite
to
possibly
where you might be, even just going out to work when you're 16, 18 or whatever age it is.
Yes.
You're probably going to be more interested at that point to actually take notice of what's been taught to you.
Yes, I'm sure that's right. I started work when I was 14.
Well, I had a paper round when I was about 10, to be fair. But
yeah. Well, that was how I learnt about stamps, because national insurance was paid through stamps. And holiday pay was as well in the sector I was in, construction.
Right.
So, I did learn a piece of that from a relatively young age, which was very helpful. But as you say, that's much harder to get. And you don't actually pay tax at those because you don't earn enough. 99.99% of cases.
Exactly. So I think it is kind of a battle to, because even if you do put education for tax in schools, you still need.
But the other place where it's important, I think, is colleges of further education.
I was going to say,
which are particularly focused on technical subjects where often people will end up being self-employed. And, there's two aspects there. There's the accounting and trying to understand how well the business is doing. And then, of course, there's the tax aspects, which sort of adds on to all of that. So, we found at the OTS that quite a lot of colleges are trying to teach that, but not everyone. And there isn't enough standard packages available. So I think HMRC is doing some more work in that area now. And I think that's really welcome because it does help prepare people for the life they're about to lead once they finish, their studies at the technical college.
Yeah, I think that probably is the best age to really try and get people to pay attention.
Yes. And universities also, some of them do put on courses, but they're drop-ins and small proportions of them
very small
go in.
Probably do go. Yeah, I mean,
but one of the most complicated for an individual, most complicated tax things is when you first start a job. Whether that's your first ever job after school or university or whatever, or it's indeed a new job when you're moving jobs or something like that, and trying to show people more about that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a while ago since we've done anything, but for a financial advisory firm, we used to do a sort of starting up in business course for their sort of academy. And
great.
More of that type of thing, probably.
Yes.
But that particular financial advisory firm was a very big firm, so has an academy structure.
Sure.
And obviously a lot of people moving into their first job, if you're going into retail, which was my sort of first proper job, if you like, there isn't any kind of academy like that would understand your payslip type of
thing, exactly. But that's really important, isn't it? And,
absolutely.
Payslips can be confusing.
Well, they are. If you don't know what you're looking at, there's all these numbers all over the place.
Yes.
What's your tax code mean, for example?
Exactly. And what's this strange reference to Table A and all that sort of thing? And so there is that complexity. Now that sort of brings us to what extent can technology and third parties provide more information to HMRC so that you can end up with potentially something like pre-population either of your tax code if you're in an employee subject to pay as you earn, or telling you this is or asking you, is this the right number to go on your your sole trade, your self-assessment, your personal tax return.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a while since I did any personal tax, but when I was just before I moved over, they were bringing in the digital tax account, where some of that was pre-populated.
Yes, and
bank information, for example, interest and things.
Not
was
really.
It?
No.
I can't remember what it was then. It must have been PAYE and probably P60 stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would urge everyone listening to this to make sure you've got the HMRC app on your phone. It's a really, really helpful way of managing your own personal tax affairs. It will help you look and see your pay-as-you-earn sources. Today, lots of people have more than one.
Yeah.
So it will put all of that. It will have your self-employment and property income in there as well, which is also really helpful. Okay. It contains your tax code. It contains your national insurance number. Yeah. For some time, the sort of biggest calls to the HMRC helpline are, what's my national insurance number? And the answer is, get the app or an online account.
Because they don't have those cards anymore, do they? I think I did have a card. I don't know where it is now, but they stopped that as well. So.
It's one of the few things I've learnt by heart, which is
well, I have too. I can tell you off by heart.
You do that, but that's what the online account and the HMRC app will just do for you in a nice and easy, straightforward way.
I do think that's one big advantage of technology. I mean, the only problem is the amount of apps I now have on my phone. But having an app, and I'm pretty sure I do have, I've got the HMRC app, I've got the NHS app, and all of these things, are very useful to not just have the information, but have easy access to the information.
Yes.
Even if you're going, if you think the last thing you want to do is have to think about tax, but actually it's just there on your phone. Yeah. You don't even have to go and open your laptop and look or anything like that. And just those small things, well, certainly for me, make a big difference.
I think but they make a difference for millions of people. Most people used to do all their banking in a branch. Yeah. Nowadays, of course, most people do their banking either online or through the bank app on their phone or
I can't remember the last time I went into a bank branch.
Exactly. And, so that's an example of how life is changing, and people find that they're freeing up time because they haven't got to make that trip. At the same time, of course, it means banks close branches, which is sort of inevitable because people aren't going into them anymore. Exactly. So the economy of that is difficult, and you need to look at the sort of more rural area. But the same applies in tax, and we're probably a bit behind. Well, we're certainly well behind where the banks are. If you like, but we should see the HMRC app and the HMRC online account as something very similar to our bank account, because it's the other big source of managing our finances.
So what is on what do HMRC currently have access to pre-populate, and what are the key things that they need to?
Well, HMRC does receive bank interest information. Yeah. They receive it, I'm sure, by the end of June, after the end of the tax year.
Right.
But it doesn't come with a proper digital identifier, so something like your national insurance number, for example. Okay. And the result of all of that is that, it's quite hard to match up, and it takes quite a bit of time to match up something from a bank into your account or my account. Yeah. And that makes a big difference. So HMRC have said publicly they can only match about 80% of the information they get. Right. And it takes them 2 or 3 months to do that. Now, what they can match, they put in people's tax codes, or at least, and they don't currently, because of older systems, advise them for if they're doing a self-employment return. But through the Making Tax Digital thing, yes, they will be advising people of interest income there. Okay. That was the project, if you like, I'm quite proud of at the Office of Tax Simplification. We looked at this, we did a lot of work, we talked to a whole range of providers. Yeah. Most of whom said, yes, we can do this. It's not, we're fine with it. We just need two big things. The first is 2 or 3 years notice,
Right.
because systems changes are big. And the second thing we need is a consistent template so that we know exactly what data you want, what format you want it, and everyone provides that in a standard way.
Yeah.
And, another learning, if you like, from the OTS is that it takes some time to change our system. So we did this report, and what that then led to in May 25 was Inland Revenue, HMRC, issuing a document about how to improve all of this and take it forward. And the government has now announced those changes are going to take effect in 2028.
Okay.
And that's because, as you say, banks and building societies need time to change systems and make sure they do stuff.
Yeah.
And HMRC is improving its systems too. It's got a transformation roadmap of how it's going to improve all of that. And, ultimately, I think we will end up with a lot more pre-population.
Yeah.
And for me, that's another form of simplification. If you haven't got to go and hunt something down, and we when at the OTS we were talking to people about it, lots of agents said this will be great because I won't have to ask my client for the data.
That's
and
kind
they're
of
terrible at keeping those records. So if we get it that way, that would be really good.
Maybe advisors will love it as well because they're not doing tax returns in January as much because they've got all the information already.
Exactly. You've got a means of getting it. And, it won't be perfect, so there's got to be an error correction mechanism, but I think there can be that.
Yeah.
But it will be a lot more accurate than people think.
Yeah. I think that's the key because when you were talking about bank interest, I was thinking, I'm sure when you set up a bank account, you have to give them your NI number, for example. So why is
lots of banks are asking for it? You
right,
don't
so not
legally
all
have to do it.
Okay.
And if, like me, you set up your first bank account when you were 17, you certainly didn't.
No,
and,
exactly.
I'm still with the same bank, so I have no idea if they've got my national insurance number, to be honest. But it would certainly be helpful if they did.
Okay, so shall we talk a little bit about the 3 stages of simplification and a bit about what's involved there?
Yeah. I think the way to look at this is the government can make policy choices which end up with a different, hopefully a simpler tax system. Not all budgets do lead to a simpler system, of course, but they can make policy changes.
Yeah.
And those policy changes often have winners and losers.
Yeah.
So you can see there's always going to be a challenge in doing all of that. And if you think one of the areas of complexity and mess in the UK tax system is VAT and how we tax food, for example, where some things are subject to zero rated, no VAT. Some things are subject to 20%, and exactly what is and what is out is quite hard to do. But equally, for a government suddenly to put 20% VAT on all our food would be quite an unpopular move. It was just our laughter tells us that's not happening. But that's an example of policy change. And, it may be a government could look at specific areas. For example, think of savoury snacks. Potato crisps are standard rated, 20% VAT, but some forms of corn snack are exempt from VAT, zero rated. Why? Shouldn't all savoury snacks be taxed the same? It's not as if they're fantastically good for us. So you can't say there's a sort of essential health angle from all of that. And we know that companies do reformulate specifically to take VAT out of their product and end up with a better return overall. So, that might be a little area to look at, whereas the chance of changing the whole VAT system on food is way too hard to do.
I agree. I think with VAT specifically, I feel like it's a very different sort of set of legislation. You've got lots of different, like with the area I work in, it's, take a scheme of reconstruction.
Yeah.
You've got 3, there's 4 conditions, but you only have to meet the 3. And provided you've met them, then it's just how do you piece this puzzle together?
Yes.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I'm oversimplifying it a bit. I do have a bit more.
Massively oversimplifying it, but interesting, that's a transaction. a series of transaction taxes. And for most of us, we keep thinking of tax on income, corporation tax or income tax, whereas VAT, of course, is a tax on transactions.
But
on purchases.
The legislation is just, was it the recent marshmallow case with 3 different types of marshmallow? And things like that. It just seems crazy that there should be a different result, kind of thing.
Well, I agree with that, but equally, to change the whole system would be really hard.
Right.
And if a government was minded, and if there was enough in it, then it's worth looking at specific small individual areas.
Right.
I pick savoury snacks. You could easily think of marshmallows or something like that, and just be clear that anything like that was going to be standard rated. But I don't think there's much chance of charging 20% VAT on potatoes or flour or bread.
Exactly.
It would be too big a difference to make. But that's an example of policy change,
right,
where you can achieve some form of simplification. The other one we've talked about already a bit is how do we use more third-party data and technology to make life simpler for people. And if you think of the UK tax system, we don't all do tax returns. About a third of us paying income tax have to do a personal tax return. And that's because of the pay-as-you-earn system, invented in 1944 and operated by employers who work out the right amount to take off, send that off to HMRC, obviously in their revenue when it first started in 1944, but today, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And there you are. And you just get the results of all of that. And you can look at it in the HMRC app if you'd like to do that. And it'll show you your pay-as-you-earn income, all that sort of thing. So that's an example. The new way of payrolling benefits. So if your employer gives you a benefit or something, charging tax through pay-as-you-earn, as opposed to an entirely separate system that tax people will call a P11D. We all love our mystical numbers, don't we? But that was a separate system. It required an adjustment to a tax code, which still most people don't understand. Whereas just saying to the employer, well, I pay you this much salary and I give you this benefit worth so much, here's the one tax charge and all of it, is actually a simpler system for everybody to do. And that's coming in a couple of years' time, I think it is.
They're already payrolling some benefits, aren't they?
I mean, it's a voluntary system at the moment, but it will become compulsory for everybody in 27, I think it is.
I think what I find, and making tax digital is another example of this, is when you're making a change, there is almost sometimes, or maybe even more often than sometimes, it feels more complicated because you're getting used to a change.
Yes.
But once once making tax digital has been in and compulsory for say 5 years, it will just be the way.
Yes.
And so I hear a lot of people talking about MTD and but it's still kind of in the testing stages, really, if you think about it.
Yes, I mean it's kicking off in April 2026 for those with gross income of more than £50,000. But the transformation it will deliver is that people ought to have a better understanding of their business activities or their property rental or both, if you've got both of those. And that's because they will be keeping better records, much more up to date. You'll have to keep them at least every quarter. Frankly, the best answer would be to do it every month for sure, and maybe every week if you have enough volume of transaction. But it will help you get a better understanding of your business. Compared to a system where you were keeping paper records, which is so much harder to follow and all that sort of thing. And that, I think, will be a worthwhile transformation for everybody. And again, when we're up and running, HMRC will be able to offer people an estimate of their tax liability. You said people don't know, how much tax they've got to pay. Absolutely. But if you're self-employed, you really don't. And one of the things we found at the Office of Tax Simplification was that lower paid self-employed people, and there's a lot of them, really hated these twice yearly bills and were much keener to pay monthly or pay as they received or something in a better sort of way.
And that's what PAYE does, isn't it?
Yeah.
You earn monthly, you pay tax, you don't even see it.
Yeah.
Couldn't be simpler really for you as an employee, as long as it's
And then
done
you
right.
can spend the money you've got left.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas,
yeah.
I do agree that having something where you are more regularly aware, at the very least, of your
Yes.
Tax exposure, and that then also brings on to not necessarily just tax technology, but lots of banks now have lots of ways to pre-populate, or where the information can feed straight into some accounting software, and all of these things are kind of lending themselves to the ability to do things monthly or quarterly a lot easier.
Artificial intelligence will really help with that categorization. Because we're a bit at the infancy of all of that. Yes, it can be done. Open banking, which is the UK is a big adopter, way ahead of many other countries, is a big enabler of all of this. So you can get a better understanding, and artificial intelligence ought to help with better categorization, so that things don't end up in the wrong sort of area by mistake. But one of the things that's important to bear in mind is that most people are not any good at bookkeeping. They didn't study the rules of accountancy.
It took me a while at college to actually grasp
exactly. But you were taught it because of your career path. And so I was taught it when I started as well. But most people don't. And we can't assume that, again, they haven't got an accounting chip either.
Yeah.
So there's no tax chip and no accounting chip. And it's a skill to learn. And artificial intelligence could help with that over time.
Yeah,
but it absolutely isn't there at the moment to do all that for you.
Yeah.
And that remains a problem. Because one of the things you do want is some understanding from people. Understanding of, what are their sales, what are their costs, the different components of cost, what is their net profit, and how is it varied by the types of work or the jobs that they're doing, all that sort of thing. You want them to have that understanding, as well as what their tax liability is at the end of the day on whatever the profit is.
Absolutely. Have we covered the first two? So we talked about policy.
Yeah, and the third area is what can HMRC itself do to make life easier? Yeah. And there's a whole range of sort of different things. For example, why is it that if you start up in business, you have to register both to deliver a personal tax return, a self-assessment return, and you have to register as self-employed?
Yeah.
If you're registering saying I'm going to have to do a tax return, then that second element of registration just shouldn't be needed. No. And that's an example of something that could be cut out. Probably isn't because of systems. The HMRC system for dealing with self-employed people is really old and is coming to the end of its life, and everything is being moved on to much more modern systems. So, when that happens, I would hope that, this double registration, which people just don't understand and don't know they need to do, would be dealt with in a much easier way.
What about because again, this years ago now, so this might have changed, but I always found that the income tax and the NICS office didn't speak to each other very well and things like that.
Yes.
So it's all, as you say, really it's systems and, offices and things like that. But.
Yeah, well, obviously the national insurance was dealt with separately by completely different agencies, now folded into HMRC. And yes, it is much better dealt with than it used to be, but elements of the system are still different. So enforcement of national insurance unpaid national insurance goes through the county court, whereas tax will almost certainly go to a tax tribunal, for example.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered those three sort of key points: the policy, the technology, and HMRC. Yeah. Just before we finish, I did just want to cover as well in terms of how many taxes we have, and whether you think actually a part of the problem is that we have a lot of different taxes. We've just said income tax and national insurance is one example.
Sure.
And would it be easy to have one and things like that? So, do you think reducing the amount of taxes would aid simplification?
I think that's a really interesting question. And that's where you run up into different objectives for the tax system. So, the more recent taxes we've had are things like plastic packaging tax, insurance premium tax, landfill tax, all of that. And they're driven by different objectives from the government. Landfill tax is designed to make it more expensive for us to dump stuff in landfill and encourage recycling. And so it's not a tax you and I pay personally, but it's borne mainly by the local councils who go and collect our rubbish. And so the cost of that went up through the tax. At the same time, a lot of the money was used to make grants to councils to improve recycling. And so you could see that as yes, it's a complexity. Yes, defining what exactly is subject to landfill tax has a complexity to it. And there have been tax cases about what is landfill and what isn't. But it has a different sort of objective, and it's the same with plastic packaging or the sugary drinks tax. They're designed to achieve a different sort of objective. And you have to ask the question, is tax the right way to do that, as opposed to regulation, of course. But often tax is the right way to do it, because a regulation is often black and white. You either mustn't do that or you must do that. Whereas tax, you can phase in a cost. So you've got an adaptation period, if you like, as well as an economic encouragement to do something. Now, whether we should still have national insurance and income tax, it is hard. But the work done by one of my predecessors, John Whiting, demonstrated that if we were to charge national insurance and income tax on the same base, that he estimated that would take 5 years to do, and would result in something like 6 or 7 million winners and 6 or 7 million losers. And if you think, he was dealing with an income tax population time of about 28 million. So if you think that half of them were going to be affected by that change, it's a big, big thing. And that's why the Chancellor of the day decided not to proceed with that work. But it was interesting to see that, that last Conservative government cut national insurance for individuals in a big way. And, maybe the Resolution Foundation's idea of put up income tax, reduce national insurance might be the way to get us there eventually. And then, once you watered down, if you like, national insurance, you could indeed completely merge in that sense. But what you couldn't do is forget about the employer's element of it, which remains the biggest part. We're probably up to at least 2/3 is borne directly by employers. Whether it falls through into wages is another question. The economists will argue with you about.
Exactly.
And we know the answer is yes, it will to some extent. But exactly how much, we don't know. And when, of course, is another tricky question.
I think timing's a big question in a lot of this, isn't it?
But, most of the tax comes in from the big taxes, and most of us aren't directly affected by things like plastic packaging tax and sugary drinks tax. Yes, we might pick it up through the cost of what it is we buy, but it's it's designed from a different objective.
And I do think that sort of policy and government objectives are quite crucial in affecting behaviour, because that's what one of the points of tax is. Okay, so just to wrap it up, and I wish we didn't have to wrap it up, to be honest, because I think it's a fascinating conversation, but I've just got a little quick fire round, and actually I wrote this before we spoke, so if any of these questions are completely irrelevant now,
it's fine.
I apologise, but thought just to finish us off, a few very quick sort of one-line answer type questions. One tax relief you would abolish immediately without hesitation?
Investors' relief. This is a special capital gains relief for people who invest in companies. We wrote a report at the capital gains report at the OTS arguing it was used so little and it didn't affect behaviour, so we should just shoot it.
I've got one client that's used it, and they only used it basically because it was they didn't know about it. It was almost accidental. So I agree with you there. The single biggest barrier to tax simplification?
I think it's a political and educational barrier. The fact is, most people in the UK and probably everywhere don't really understand enough about tax. So that's a barrier, and that means that it's harder for governments to propose changes which would improve the tax system, would reduce economic disincentives, if you like, and that becomes harder to do.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what I was going to, I have another third question, but I'm going to change that to: is tax simplification either necessary? Let's go with that.
Thinking of simplification is necessary, yes, because it will deliver the government's policies in the best possible manner. Right. So yes, it very much so. Whether that's in design of something or HMRC's implementation, that will vary according to the subject area, but both are really important, yes.
Does technology genuinely reduce complexity, or does it merely conceal it?
I think, well, we know the answer to that. It's both. It can indeed make life simpler for you. So instead of, although if you think of people before the Second World War, everyone had to do an income tax return, report all of that. After the Second World War, we had many, many more taxpayers, but most of them didn't have to do a return because it was dealt with through the pay-as-you-earn system. So yes, that was a good idea. Do they understand it is a trickier question.
Absolutely.
And I do think that's a really important question for governments to think about, is as they move to more use of technology, more pre-population and the like, which has to be a good thing, they still need to explain what's going on and explain the choices available where people do have choice.
Absolutely. And a final verdict: in our lifetime, will the UK tax system become meaningfully simpler?
I think it will. Yes, I'm optimistic about this. I think there's no doubt that HMRC is thinking hard about that and is working to improve matters. Now, you butt up against political realities, and that will always be a challenge. But over time, I think improved tax administration by HMRC, partly enabled by updated systems and improved use of wider use of technology, should make life simpler for a great many of us. Yes.
See, I had perhaps a slightly different answer in that I agree completely with what you're saying, but also we've got the challenge of, we've still got technology, we've still got globalisation. So I think the world is going to become more complex, to which tax has to keep up. And so you're naturally going, like we've already said, you're naturally going to have more complexity to fight. I think.
That's true too. But if you think, one of the changes is that very small businesses are selling stuff through platforms. What's happening now is those platforms are reporting that data both to their customers and to HMRC and other tax authorities. So you're making life easier for people, or we should be making life easier for people. Same with crypto. There's a bunch of people who buy and sell that. Most people who buy and sell it have very little idea that they have a tax obligation if they make money from it. And so they don't report it. But we're introducing platform reporting for crypto as well.
Right.
And, those sort of things will help reduce the complexity of all of that.
Because actually, what crypto was one of the things on my mind when I made that comment. So that's.
But that platforms are going to have to report to tax authorities, I think, from 2027 onwards.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me. That really genuinely has been very fascinating to learn a bit more about the OTS as well as generally tax simplification. And actually, it's gone slightly differently to how I envisaged sort of the conversation going, which I always find is a good thing. So thanks very much for joining me. And to everyone listening, thanks for listening. Hopefully you found it useful and informative, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.